In celebration of America's 250th birthday, the Union Pacific Steam Program embarked on a coast-to-coast tour with the largest operating steam locomotive in the world, Big Boy number 4014, leading a special train to select cities across America. 7 Idea Productions covered the eastbound leg of the West Coast Tour in the spring of 2026, as the steam special traveled nearly 1,200 miles from Sacramento, California, to Cheyenne, Wyoming. We followed Big Boy through the rain-soaked Feather River Canyon, across the remote desert of Nevada, the Great Salt Lake of Utah, over the Wasatch Mountains, and across the windswept plains of Wyoming. The 4014 is the largest operating steam locomotive in the world, and one of 8 Big Boys still in existence today. Built to handle the increased demands brought on by World War II, the 4014 was completed in November of 1941, just prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor. After logging more than 1 million miles, the 4014 was retired in 1961 and put on display in Pomona, California. It was reacquired by the Union Pacific in 2013 and returned to service in 2019 to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the completion of the first transcontinental railroad. Big Boy measures 133 feet from coupler to coupler and weighs in at 1.2 million pounds. It is essentially 2 steam locomotives under 1 boiler, with 2 sets of 8 driving wheels. The forward set is hinged, so the big engine can bend more easily through curves, something it could not do if it had a rigid frame. Photographer Christian Schultz got these scenes of the 4014 in and around Sacramento in the days leading up to its return trip to Cheyenne. Along with the 4014 is Heritage Diesel number 1616, honoring President Abraham Lincoln, who signed the Railway Act in 1862, creating the Union Pacific. The second diesel is the America 250 locomotive, numbered the 1776. We see them here at the old Southern Pacific shops in Sacramento. April 12, 2026 marked the first day of Big Boy's return trip to Cheyenne. Today, we are going to focus on the eastbound trip through the Feather River Canyon in Northern California, the route of the old Western Pacific, which became part of the UP in 1983. Departing Roseville, the train will head north toward Oroville and into the Feather River Canyon. We will visit scenic locations like Intake, Pulga, Tobin, the Honeymoon Tunnels, Belden, and of course the famous Keddie Wye. From there, we will continue east through Williams Loop, Spring Garden, and catch a nighttime run-by over Clio Trestle before tying up at Portola. We begin just north of Roseville at Lincoln on UP's Valley Sub. Big Boy is en route to Binney Junction, where it'll enter the former Western Pacific track and head east. Skipping ahead to Oroville, we find a classic passenger station which was built in 1910. The famous California Zephyr once stopped here before passenger service ended and the depot was closed in 1970. Across from the depot at Hewitt Park rests the WP 164. This 060 steam locomotive was built by Elko in 1919 for the United Verde Copper Company in Arizona. Later, it served Western Pacific as a switcher in yards including Stockton, Portola, Oroville, and Wendover, Utah. Oroville is not the busy yard it once was during the Western Pacific years, but it still exists at the west end of Union Pacific's Canyon Sub. Classic searchlight signals still guard the west switch. The high green isn't for the 4014, but rather a westbound freight led by UP 7360. It has just made a crew change at nearby Mitchell Avenue. As we speak, the steam special is in the hole several miles to the south at Brock, waiting for this and one other westbound. This is a good-sized manifest train with a couple of remote-controlled helpers cut in. The train departs Oroville and should have clear signals all the way to Roseville. Meanwhile, the steam special waits patiently in the siding at Brock for the same train. With the westbound out of the way, we pick up the action again with these pacing shots as the 4014 heads toward Marysville and the WP main line at Binney Junction. Back at Oroville, Big Boy crosses the Feather River below the Oroville Dam as the sky darkens. A sign of things to come. Let's take another look at the bridge crossing from our ground-based camera. .4014 slowly crosses the North Fork of the Feather River on a scenic 1,000-foot-long bridge at intake after exiting Tunnel 8. This is the eastern end of a line relocation project when the Oroville Dam was constructed in 1962. The old line followed the river rather than crossing it here. The dispatcher has the train lined into the siding at Pulga to meet a westbound. There is also a maintenance of way crew working east of here, and they will need the siding to set off the track before Big Boy arrives. We are guessing that is why the train is traveling at restricted speed. Moving further into the Feather River Canyon, we set up at East Pulga. The nearby Poe Dam is located just east of the siding. This leg of the journey was originally planned for Donner Pass. However, deteriorating weather conditions led the UP to reroute the steam special back through the Feather River Canyon. The storm that is bringing snow to Donner Pass is also bringing heavy rainfall to the canyon, which is prone to rock slides. An excavator high rails into the siding at Pulga to clear up after doing some work. Due to the risk of rock slides, a high rail truck escorts each train through the canyon, running 2 mileposts ahead, making sure the track is clear. These high railers are nicknamed Broncos, a tradition dating back to the Western Pacific years. Bronco Whiskey is escorting the 4014 and pulls to the east switch in a meet with a westbound grain train. Big Boy carefully eases up behind the waiting Bronco. Since the westbound is still a little ways out, the Bronco crew get invited into the cab while they wait. Not something they get to do every day. While the rain continues to drench the canyon, the westbound's Bronco finally arrives. After a long wait, UP 7485 West arrives at Pulga with grain loads and mixed merchandise. The grain loads conclude with 3 remote-controlled DPU engines and mixed freight. With the westbound clear, the dispatcher quickly aligns a switch for the 4014, and Bronco Whiskey is back on the move. Rain may not be our favorite weather for rail fanning, but when a steam engine is involved, it's magic. This is by far one of the best startups we've ever witnessed. East of Pulga, the train crosses the Rock Creek Trestle, while pacers on Highway 70 give chase. Continuing up the canyon, rail fans gather at Tobin, where the railroad flies over Highway 70. East of Camp Rogers, Big Boy passes through tunnels 16 through 22. The engine's smoke deflector is activated and will be opened just before it passes out of frame. A cold rain continues as the 4014 passes Rich Bar through Serpentine Canyon. Gold was discovered here in 1850, and miners flocked to the Feather River country. The ghost town of Rich Bar is located nearby. The railroad continues to snake through the canyon near Virgilia. One of the most popular photo locations in the Feather River Canyon is the Keddie Wye. But maybe we don't have to tell you that. It may be a cold and dreary day, but for these fans, it was totally worth waiting for. Some people had waited here for hours to get the shot. Here is a better view as Big Boy exits Tunnel 32. East of Quincy, the steam special works around a spiral known as Williams Loop. It was built to keep the grade at a manageable 1% as the railroad climbs to the summit of Beckworth Pass. Just east of Williams Loop is the siding of Spring Garden. The light is starting to fade as the steam special continues toward Portola. The cold weather hasn't dimmed the spirits of one young rail fan. East of Spring Garden, a green eye burns brightly, beckoning the 4014 eastward over Clio Trestle, a few miles west of Portola. As night settles in, the UP steam crew will tie up at Portola, where 4014 will lay over for a day before continuing east to Winnemucca. Thick forest and deep canyons transition into arid desert as the 4014 continues its West Coast tour for America's 250th celebration. On the morning of April 14th, 4014 would continue to lead the coast-to-coast tour away from the Sierra Nevada mountains with a fantastic startup, after an official photo by one of the crew. Big Boy disappears in a giant cloud of steam, and the town vanishes with it. There is nothing like steam on a cool spring morning. The train follows the route of the Western Pacific out of California and into the remote desert country of Nevada. UP's Winnemucca subdivision turns north at Reno Junction and northeast through Flannigan, where the old Southern Pacific Modoc line from Oregon once made a connection. After cresting Sand Pass, the line skirts the edge of the remote Smoke Creek Desert and on to Gerlach, and then the Black Rock Desert, bearing east for Winnemucca. Here, the former Western Pacific meets up with the old Southern Pacific, and the two lines roughly follow each other through Elko and on to Wells. One of the highlights of this segment is Palisade Canyon, west of Elko. Moving into Nevada, a pair of searchlight signals stand guard near milepost 387 on the Winnemucca subdivision, just east of Flannigan. The 4014 leads its train through the desert toward Sand Pass. This former Western Pacific main line traverses the remote desert country of northern Nevada. Off the beaten path would fairly accurately describe where we are, as the main line skirts the north edge of the Virginia mountains and the starkly beautiful Pyramid Lake. Appearing at first like a mirage, the blue water and unique formations stand in stark contrast to the rest of the region. The sighting of Sand Pass marks the old ghost town where railroad workers once lived on the edge of the Smoke Creek Desert. At one time, there was a telegrapher's office and a rock quarry for the Western Pacific. The East Switch is a good place to wait for westbound trains. These classic signals will light up when something is approaching, like that grain train over there. Oh, you don't see it? Let's try this view. A long ways from the nearest resemblance of hustle and bustle, we wait. The 4014 arrives at Sand Pass, where it'll make a 30-minute service stop. Leaving the steam crew to do their work, we next plan to catch the big boy at Gerlach. It's out there, a ways. The Surprise Valley Road will take you most of the way, aptly named because it may surprise you just how wide and vast this country is. You know how in Western movies there will be a town situated in the middle of nowhere for no apparent reason? That was our first impression of Gerlach, only this tiny community 100 miles from Reno had a reason. That reason is still spiked to the ties in front of us. Founded in 1906 with the arrival of the Western Pacific, Gerlach is known as the gateway of the Black Rock Desert. People have gathered trackside today, probably not to catch this westbound manifest led by UP 9048. As a bonus, onlookers get a rail inspection vehicle, which will be clearing up soon for the Steam Special. Finally, 4014 thunders through the small town as it heads for Winnemucca, over 100 miles to the east through the remote desert country. The following morning, we are set up just east of Winnemucca at Wesso. This is a crossover point between the former Southern Pacific and Western Pacific lines, both now part of the UP. A westbound grain train slowly approaches Wesso on the Southern Pacific track, referred to as Track 1 between here and Wells, Nevada. The big diesels come to a stop near control point CPF 536. The train wants to cross over to the Western Pacific track, which is currently occupied by a 1941 Alco 4884, which has the high ball out of Winnemucca. The highlight of the route between Winnemucca and Elko is Palisade Canyon. Both railroad lines run through the canyon on opposite sides of the Humboldt River. Just west of us, the tracks swap sides, making the Southern Pacific Main, Track 1, on the north side of the canyon. The 4014 slowly exits Tunnel 1, holding short of a red signal. A grain train is switching just ahead at Carlin, and the steam crew was told it would be a few minutes.
Alright, dispatcher 9, EP 4014, you got dispatcher's permission to act on the signal RV 526. I have a signal maintainer.
After a bit of a wait, we finally get the good news.
Okay, signal maintainer is lining our switch per the dispatcher. We have authority to 5 is we can take the signal indication as CPRB 526. Is that correct? Over. All right, here we go. 4014. Here we go.
Let's look at that run-by again from the ground. After departing Palisade Canyon, the coast-to-coast special would continue to Elko, Nevada, where it would be on public display and participate in a company picnic for UP employees and their families. In the miles to come is the crossing of the Great Salt Lake to the historic railroad town of Ogden, Utah. It's the morning of April 17th, and we are just east of Elko as Big Boy 4014 continues its journey to Ogden, Utah. The temperature at Elko was 12 degrees Fahrenheit this morning, and the cool air would make for a great day of steam. Mile marker 589 puts us near Deeth on the former Southern Pacific Main Line, now referred to as Track 1 on UP's Lakeside subdivision. The grade here is an easy 0.5% as Big Boy marches eastward at a good clip through the Star Valley. The main line passes through a large cut west of the community of Wells. Wells appears on the timetable at milepost 607.5 on the Old Southern Pacific and 718.4 for trains traveling the former Western Pacific Main Line. At this point, the WP track turns to the southeast. not to be seen again as it makes its way toward Salt Lake City. The SP turns to the northeast, taking a bead on Ogden. The former Southern Pacific Main Line departs Wells and climbs a grade of less than 1.5% to Moor, and on through Pequot and Montello before crossing into the state of Utah. After passing the station of Lucin, it is pretty much a straight shot through the Great Salt Lake Desert to our next vantage point at Lakeside, then across the Great Salt Lake Causeway to Promontory Point, and finally Ogden, where the train will be on public display for a couple of days. After a 30-minute service stop, the 4014 gets underway to the delight of the residents of this small town. Keep in mind that Big Boy is essentially two steam locomotives under one massive boiler. The extra set of cylinders and valves create a unique sound, a signature of an articulated steam locomotive. The train departs Wells on a grade of 1.43% to Moor Summit. The grade tops out at around 6,300 feet above sea level as the 4014 passes mile marker 617 near Moor. Juniper trees add a little green to a country that knows little else but sagebrush. After cresting the northern end of the Pequot Mountains, the railroad begins a downhill run to the Great Salt Lake Desert in Utah. Near the old ghost town of Luray, the train eases down a 1.4% grade to Montello. To reduce wear on Big Boy's brake shoes, diesel number 1616, the Abraham Lincoln, is in heavy dynamics to keep the speed of the 1.2 million pound steam engine and the rest of the train in check. After making it through the mountains, the last obstacle the railroad faces is the crossing of the Great Salt Lake. This section of track is known as the Lucin Cutoff. The original transcontinental grade was to the north through the mountains. The Lucin Cutoff was completed in 1904 and shaved 44 miles off the original route, creating a nearly straight shot across the Great Salt Lake Desert. The newer alignment is 102 miles long, which is just a good stretch of the legs in this country. This impressive view is from Lake Point. It is about the only place that you can see the railroad in this vast and empty land. There is a quarry here, most likely for the building and maintaining of the causeway across the Great Salt Lake. Looking west, it is pretty much a straight shot for 55 miles across the desert to Lucin. Every now and then, a little steam cloud can be seen rising from the desert. Our train is coming, and all we have to do is wait. Big Boy isn't slow in coming, as one would expect slowness to be. This is a big country, and it has a way of putting things into perspective. That little bit of movement way out there is the largest operating steam locomotive in the world. Before the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869, this desert was a major obstacle for pioneers moving west. It was known as the Hastings Cutoff, a supposed shortcut from the more established trail to the north. In 1846, the ill-fated Donner Party took this route and lost considerable time, putting them in California's Sierra Nevada mountains much later in the year than planned. We all know about the heavy snows on what became known as Donner Pass. The Steam Special will be making one last service stop before continuing to Ogden. The steam crew wastes little time getting to work oiling, inspecting, and shooting the rods with grease. With the work completed, the crew is accounted for as part of a safety feature known as tag and flag before the engine turns a wheel.
All right, can we have your tag and flag? Tag and the flag is yours, sir. 4014, 1616, are you ready?
1616 ready.
All right, hello, Tracy Murray. Here we go, pulling. Copy, we need about 12 cars to a spot. 12.
In the stillness of the Salt Lake Desert, Big Boy 4014 begins its final leg of today's destination to Ogden, Utah. Distances can be a little hard to judge out here. The next 20 miles are across the causeway which separates the north and south arms of the lake toward the Promontory Mountains to the east. That jog in the causeway replaced a 12-mile-long wooden trestle that was used between 1904 and the late 1950s. The red color on the north arm of the lake is due to the higher salinity of the water above the causeway, which keeps it from mixing with the south arm, an interesting phenomenon that can be easily seen from space. Beyond Promontory Point, the Wasatch Mountains lift their snowy shoulders skyward. The railroad grade through those mountains was the main obstacle that Big Boy was built to handle. And in a few days, 4014 will be back on its old stomping ground, leading a steam special back to Cheyenne, Wyoming. Today, we will follow Big Boy 4014 as it runs unassisted up the Wasatch Mountains between Ogden, Utah and Evanston, Wyoming, and on to Green River. Ogden Union Station is a grand example from America's golden age of railroading, when trains were the way to travel. Union Pacific's heritage includes the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869 at nearby Promontory Summit. This golden spike celebrates the railroad's proud history. It is a picture-perfect morning with flags waving along the street and hundreds of people gathering to get a closer look at the world's largest operating steam locomotive, Big Boy number 4014. Also on display are Diesel's 1616 and the 1776. Abraham Lincoln was our nation's 16th president, hence the number 1616, and he signed the Pacific Railway Act on July 1, 1862, thus creating the Union Pacific. The colors of the commemorative diesel are a nod to steam locomotive number 119, which met Central Pacific's Jupiter at Promontory Summit to mark the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869. The 1776 wears UP's traditional armor yellow and harbor mist gray. Like the 1616, it is an EMD SD70M built in the year 2000. Its original number was the 4164. Naturally, it is a 1941 Elko that draws the crowds, a piece of living history from World War II that is now on a coast-to-coast tour in celebration of our nation's 250th birthday. On Monday, April 20th, the steam special will climb through the Wasatch Mountains to Evanston, Wyoming, as it makes its way back to Cheyenne. The 4014 slowly enters UP's Ogden Yard. While the train pauses for a switch, a pair of SD70Ms move a cut of hoppers on an adjacent track. It is a seemingly unrelated event to those of us present this morning, but we haven't seen the last of those hoppers. As the auxiliary tenders pass, we notice something different with this morning's consist. The diesels are missing. Today's journey through the Wasatch Mountains is 100% steam, and we're loving it. There are a few other changes with today's train, as we will see coming up. Today's route takes the 4014 through Weber Canyon and on through the historic town of Elko at the base of Elko Canyon. This grade over the Wasatch Mountains is what Big Boy was made for, and we will follow it over the hill to Evanston, Wyoming. Big Boy heads east through Weber Canyon with those hoppers we saw in the yard. The historic town of Elko, Utah sits at the bottom of a grade to the top of the Wasatch Mountains through Elko Canyon. Before the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, Elko was a stop on the Mormon Trail. It was later a helper station for trains tackling the grade to the summit and Wasatch. It was this mountain pass, coupled with the increased demand for rail transportation during World War II, that led to this class of locomotive. It was originally referred to as the Wasatch type. 4014 has little trouble tackling the mountain grade it was designed for as it climbs the west slope of the Wasatch. There has been some talk about Union Pacific running diesels with their steam locomotives. So to set the record straight, here is the Abe Lincoln and 1776 leading the rest of the train up the grade to Evanston. It is proof that UP's heritage diesels can make it on their own without the assistance of a 1941 steam locomotive. Arriving in Evanston, the steam crew gets to work spotting their train while the Abe Lincoln waits patiently with the rest of the heritage fleet of historic passenger cars. Those cars will deadhead back to Council Bluffs, Iowa, where Union Pacific maintains the historic fleet. As for Big Boy, there's a fuel tanker standing by and some eager fans waiting for their chance to get a closer view of this living piece of history. Evanston was founded during the construction of the first transcontinental railroad, which arrived here in 1868. The 27-stall roundhouse was built in 1912, replacing the original structure from 1871. It survives today as one of the last intact roundhouses on the UP. The rail yard is situated between Ogden and Green River, and includes a machine shop, which is still standing, as well as a powerhouse. Most of the brick buildings you see today were built between 1912 and 1913, as UP modernized its Evanston facilities. The city of Evanston now owns and maintains most of the buildings, and the complex was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1985. It is not every day one gets a chance to see a living, breathing big boy sitting next to this beautifully preserved piece of Union Pacific history. Back on the ground, festivities continue in this little town that shares a common bond with the railroad that gave it birth back in 1868, and still takes time to stop and share in that history. Union Pacific doesn't have to do this, but because they do, younger generations get to experience something firsthand that maybe their great-grandparents knew. Not in photos or sitting cold in a museum, but alive and breathing. While the public is entertained, preparations are being made for tomorrow's run to Rock Springs. The local fire department aids in filling the massive water tenders after Big Boys climb over the Wasatch Mountains. Diesel number 7771 has been added to assist and especially for dynamic braking. This minimizes the wear and tear on brake shoes. Not to mention it saves on fuel and water for the 4014, which has quite an appetite. The next morning, 2 observations were made just prior to the scheduled 9 a.m. departure that would change the day's plans. First, one of the hopper cars was found to have a defect with one of its trucks and was bad ordered. Second, diesel number 7771 had a major issue with its air brake system, and the GEVO was bad ordered as well. This meant the 4014 would again be running unassisted all the way to Green River, and steam fans rejoiced. We took this extra time to take another look at the beautifully restored roundhouse and turntable in the morning light. The first order of business for the steam crew is to set out the diesel engine. The next task is to set out the bad order car, which happens to be the first hopper in the string. From this angle, you can see how the 4014 articulates as it moves through the switches in the yard. The 4 pilot wheels and 8 lead drivers pivot, allowing the big engine to bend through the curves. Big Boy has 16 driving wheels, and it would be impossible to navigate any type of curve if the engine were built on a rigid frame. Articulated locomotives were the invention of a Swiss mechanical engineer named Anatole Mallet back in 1884. Many types of articulated locomotives were built, Big Boy being one of the finest examples. Most of the 25 big boys built logged over 1 million miles each, hauling freight for the UP in the 1940s and 50s. The 4014 backs to its train. After setting out the bad order car, 4014 finally heads toward the main line for today's eastbound run to Rock Springs, just east of UP's big yard at Green River. .4014 stops to pick up a crew member before departing, and the fireman has a good head of steam. Today's route across southern Wyoming will take us through Leroy, Carter, and Granger, which is the junction with UP's Oregon Short Line route to Portland, Oregon, via Pocatello, Idaho. From there, the 4014 will climb Peru Hill and drop into Green River, where Union Pacific has a busy yard dating back to the steam era. The crew will tie up at Rock Springs before continuing east. East of Evanston, Big Boy coasts along at milepost 891 near Leroy. Traffic on I-80 pass in the background. The distant signal bridge marks the junction with UP's Pocatello sub at Granger. This is where the Oregon Short Line heads west, linking Idaho and Oregon with the overland route. The dispatcher has hung a green for the 4014, which will be making a mandatory service stop here. With the squeal of brake shoes, the train comes to an easy stop. A trio of vintage EMDs slowly glide through the desert, serving a nearby trona mine. Wyoming has the world's largest deposit of trona, also known as soda ash. It is used mainly in glass making and in the chemical industry, including a substance you probably have in your kitchen: baking soda. Soda ash is the state's largest export, and several unit trains originate from here on the UP. As we survey the country, a little dust devil whispers across the seemingly barren land. Only, it isn't a dust devil. Big Boy is on the move as it nears the top of Peru Hill before dropping into Green River. Following the sound of its whistle, 4014 crosses the Green River and enters an iconic western rail yard it is called on many times in the mid-20th century. The Steam Special will spend some time switching in the yard, and a working diesel will again be added to the consist before continuing to today's destination of Rock Springs. Rock Springs gets its name from a rock spring once located near the north end of town. One account is that a lost Pony Express rider found the spring by accident, although mountain man Jim Bridger was said to have known about the spring before the Pony Express era, which only lasted from 1860 to 1861. Coal mining is a big part of this town's history. Near the Rock Springs Depot is the world's first electric mining locomotive manufactured in the U.S. Named the Charlie Smith, the 9-ton engine was purchased in May of 1892. It was nearly 50 years old when Big Boy 4014 first steamed into Rock Springs, sometime in late 1941 or early 42. Oh, the stories it could tell. It is April 23, 2026, and the Steam Special is ready to back out of a house track and on to the main. The approaching train is the UP 7237 East, which is taking the siding. It is a busy morning on UP's Rawlins subdivision. The dispatcher needs to get the 4014 moving east, and a high-priority westbound Z train is also in the mix. This lower priority manifest will wait here in the hole and follow Big Boy eastward toward Rawlins. With our view of the main line blocked and with restricted airspace keeping us from deploying the drone, we make a last-minute decision for this grab shot as the Steam Special departs Rock Springs. The weather for the next couple of days is cloudy, windy, and cold. The cold part is good for Steam. Today's journey will traverse the 133-mile Rawlins subdivision to its namesake yard. We will catch the action at Thayer, Point of Rocks, Tipton, Wamsutter, Creston, and Reiner as the 4014 rolls over and through the Great Divide Basin. Big Boy is eastbound toward Point of Rocks. The track in the foreground is an older alignment which is now used as a siding, occasionally for storing cars. Point of Rocks was an old stage station and at one time a stop on the Transcontinental Railroad. This station was built in 1862 and survives today. It has a few stories to tell, but we can't tarry long. There's a big boy marching through the Wyoming plains. The railroad has three summits to cross as it heads through the Great Divide Basin. The first is here at Tipton. After cresting the divide, the railroad drops through Red Desert and into Wamsutter, where 4014 makes a service stop. Wamsutter was founded in 1868 as a service stop for steam locomotives. With the summits of Tipton to the west and Creston to the east, it is an uphill climb out of Wamsutter no matter which way trains are headed. Steam locomotives could take on coal and water here before continuing through the Great Divide Basin. Although this stop is only for lubrication of the running gear, Wamsutter is again fulfilling its original purpose on the Union Pacific, going back 158 years. The builders of the Transcontinental Railroad could never have imagined the steam giants that would roam the Wyoming plains in the 1930s and 40s, or the trains they pulled, let alone what is approaching us from the east. 10,000 plus feet of double stacks powered by 6 diesel-electric engines, capable of producing a total of 26,300 horsepower. Operated by a crew of 2. With the servicing completed, the 4014 continues the final leg of today's journey over the Continental Divide to Rawlins. The Steam Special has just crossed the top of the divide at Creston and starts down the east side. East of Reiner, there is one final grade before arriving at Rawlins. Named for General John Aaron Rawlins, who served under Ulysses S. Grant during the Civil War, Rawlins marks a division point, with the Laramie sub continuing east to Cheyenne. There is also a yard and locomotive fueling track here. The Steam Special will spend the night here before making the final push to Cheyenne. The final leg of our journey negotiates the 172-mile Laramie subdivision around the Medicine Bow and Laramie Mountains, passing the stations of Hannah, Medicine Bow, Rock River, Bosler, and Laramie. The line then climbs over Sherman Hill, passing through the Hermosa Tunnels before the conclusion of the West Coast Tour in Cheyenne. April 24th, the final day of the western leg dawns clear and windy, not uncommon for Wyoming. Today's journey will take us east through Medicine Bow and down to Laramie, then over Sherman Hill to Cheyenne. Three miles west of the old UP coal supply town of Hannah. That's where we find ourselves as Big Boy tops one of many 0.82% climbs and races down the other side. The grades aren't steep, but there is no relief from them either in this country. East of Hannah, Big Boy makes another scheduled stop at Medicine Bow, where this classic depot still stands. A high-priority Z train has been catching up, and the dispatcher runs it around the 4014. A small crowd have gathered to see the coast-to-coast tour come through their town, and they line up to watch as the engineer begins to open the throttle and Big Boy again gets underway. East of Rock River, the railroad comes against the northern flank of Lower Pine Ridge before pushing through to the southeast. A work train heads up the north track, stopping short of the signals as Big Boy approaches on Main 2. These signals guard the crossovers from Main 2 to Main 1 at Bosler, west of Laramie. At this point, the railroad loosely follows the Laramie River as it meanders south between the Laramie and Medicine Bow Mountains. At this point, the railroad is nearly a straight shot through the valley on a southeast heading. The steam crew have been dealing with heavy crosswinds today. One gust nearly swept a cooler out of the cab of the 4014, and a hatch atop the first auxiliary tender is blown open. While Big Boy makes a scheduled stop at Laramie, we get a head start on Sherman Hill at the Hermosa Tunnels. A westbound vehicle train slowly approaches the tunnels on Main 2. Sometime later, the 4014 exits the tunnel on Main 1. We wonder how many times it has passed through these tunnels during its working career. The Sherman granite rock outcroppings tower above the train as it continues toward Dale Junction and the top of the grade just east of here. It is a 1.55% downhill run to Cheyenne as Big Boy rolls through granite. The diesel's dynamic brakes are quite handy at times like this. It is a downhill run all the way into Cheyenne. Set up just west of the yard, 3 vintage SD40-2s, now called SD40Ms, lead a local into town. We don't know if it is the wind or if the crew have been having problems with these units, but all the open doors remind us of Southern Pacific diesels back in the early 1990s. Pardon me, but your prime movers are showing. The train disappears under the old C&S Bridge. The Colorado and Southern Railway dates back to 1898. It became part of the CB&Q in 1908 and merged into the BN in 1982. Today, BNSF trains occasionally cross over the UP on their way to and from Colorado. This may not have been the grand entrance into Cheyenne you were expecting. After we caught the 4014 at Granite, the train crossed over to Main 3 at Borey via the Borey Cutoff and was wide at Spear. It then backed into the yard at Cheyenne. And just like that, the western leg of 4014's coast-to-coast tour was in the books. For us, it was the end of an 1,170-mile chase through 4 states that began back in the rain-soaked Feather River Canyon in Northern California. Here are highlights from that memorable trip. would like to thank the Union Pacific for making it possible to see this piece of living history on the rails, and hopefully for years to come. Happy 250, America, and as always, until next time, thanks for watching.